Photogs, thanks for tuning in. So let's talk about the clone stamp today. The clone stamp is probably my most widely used tool, and it's because it removes things or duplicates things within your image. So what it does is it selects a certain point in the image and it paints it somewhere else by using a brush-like tool. So let's start by hitting Control J or Command J if you're on a Mac, and you can duplicate the background layer or whatever layer you're working on. And the reason I always duplicate that layer is because if I make mistakes, I want to just delete this and then they all go away. But if you make too many mistakes on the original layer and you can't go back, then you got to deal with that. All right. So I'm going to zoom in down here, and we're going to get rid of all these dirty spots in the concrete. So clone stamp is selected, or you can hit the letter S. That will do the same thing. You generally want to pick a brush that's a little bit bigger than your actual thing that you're removing. Now, you don't want to go giant for something that tiny, but you also don't want to go too small and then have to paint around lots of little spaces. So let's pick a brush. You know, this is pretty good for all these things. Now, if you hold down the Option key or the Alt key if you're on a PC, you'll notice it brings up these crosshairs. This selects where you're taking data from, and then when you let go, it brings back the brush, and then that's what you're going to paint. So let's take this area right here, select that, and paint this. And look, spots are gone. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove all these. And if you'll notice, every time I click, you get this little crosshair that pops up about 2 inches to the right. That tells me where it's taking data from. So that's important because it's going to stay in the same relative place from your brush until you reselect a new area. So if I'm going down here, for example, that still works. This still works and looks pretty good. But you don't want to get what are called clone tracks, which is, for example, if I were to click right here and then brush down this whole space, you'll notice that things are repeating, right? This is repeating, this is repeating, this thing is repeating. You want to avoid that. So the way to get around it, let's make our brush a little smaller, is to just keep picking a new place to sample for all of your spots. Another really cool thing to keep in mind when you're doing this is your blend modes. In an area like this, that's pretty important because you'll notice there's a gradient. It's brighter here, and then it fades into pretty dark shadows. So let's go back to normal real quick. If I were to sample something over here and paint over here, obviously not right. Same if I go in the shadows and paint over here, I'm not into that. So let's go with lighten, for example. And this means that if I select an area, about right here, and I try to paint over something darker, then I can see the spots. But if I select here and try to paint over something lighter, you don't see it because it will take your spot, whatever you selected, and it will only apply those pixels if they are lighter than the area you are painting over. I'll say that again. So if I'm selecting something right here, and I try and paint something that's lighter than my original space, you won't see anything. But if I select here and paint something darker, it's going to replace it with the lighter of the two. Just like when you go to have a layer change blending modes, it's going to replace whatever was there with the lighter of the two options. So this is important because maybe I only want to replace the dark spot, but I don't want to lighten up everything else around it because this gradient can be hard to manage sometimes. So I'll select this and paint over that and do the same thing over here. And notice if I select a spot here, I'm following along the diagonal of the gradient. Let me draw a line in so you can see what I'm talking about. So this is the diagonal of the gradient, about the middle point, because it's brighter over here, it's darker over here. I mean, I guess really it's more like this. So if I'm going to paint an area right here, then I generally want to select an area close to it that's along the same line, right? You don't want to select a lighter area to paint over a darker area. So let's get rid of that. Back to our clone stamp, and I'm just going to keep selecting spots nearby to get rid of all of these blemishes. This works the same with skin. This is how I get rid of pimples, blemishes in the skin, anything unwanted. All right, let's put our blend mode back to normal. So I have pretty good control over this spot. All right, so let's jump back out. Whoa, what did I just do? There was a few more spots over here I want to get to. You don't have to get all of them. I know this is just a demo, so how about that? All right, so before and after, pretty big difference, right? And how simple was that to get rid of those spots? All right, so now we can take some lights out. Let's get rid of these because they're kind of distracting up here. So a little smaller brush, and I'm going to select this part of the beam, and I'm going to paint over. Then I'm going to select an area from this spot. Oops. Make sure your lines match up. Bam, the light's gone. Let's get rid of all of those other ones up here. So I'm going to select over here and paint over my light and do the same thing on this side. There were some other little ones. There they are. Select this spot. Now when you have lines like this, it's important to follow the lines. So you can see where I select here, and wherever I paint, we'll paint those lines. So I have to make sure that the lines I'm painting line up with everything else around it. Let's get rid of that. Now these are distracting too. So let's pick this beam over here, and we'll use that to paint this other one. These are pretty minor details in the image, so you don't have to be 100% with them. But they'll make a big difference when we go back and look at the before and afters. Okay, the last things I wanted to touch on were these. So what I'm going to do here is actually drop my opacity down, come on, to 30%. Now it's not cooperating. Here, let's just slide that down. I can't see what number it is. Close enough. All right, so I'm going to select this layer, and I'm going to paint over the one above it. There we go. Cool. Same thing over here. Just slowly add stuff in. And that looks pretty good. Cool. Zoom out. And now all those distracting lights are gone. And again, how about the before and after? Pretty big difference, right? This image is way cleaner now. And that's how you use the clone stamp. It's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. Just pick the areas you want to work with, paint over the areas you want to get rid of. Change your blend modes to make it easier if you want, and you can change your opacity if you don't want to apply as much. So play around with it, practice, see what you can remove out of things. Just start grabbing pictures and removing things. And jump on over into the group and share what you come up with.
Thanks again for tuning in to another episode. I hope this one was helpful. Don't forget to hit subscribe down below, and if you haven't already, swing on by our private Facebook community, Photogs Unite, and join the party. Get all kinds of tips and tricks, get some photo critiques, and every Monday I do a live Q&A sesh where you can send me all the questions you've got, and I will drop knowledge bombs on everyone. So until next time, photogs, keep shooting, and remember that every photo you take brings you one step closer.